In the small town of Willow Creek, Dr. Laura Hayes, a pragmatic veterinarian, transforms her clinic into a beacon of hope for animals and the community. The story begins with work. When a local dog tracking operation is uncovered, Laura and her team partner with law enforcement to rescue dozens of neglected animals. And the clinic grows into Riverbend Rescue, an initiative that not only saves lives, but educates and empowers the community. Overcoming challenge and criticism, Laura evolved from a rice-driven leader to compassion. In the end, Riverbend's efforts ripple far beyond Willow Creek, establishing a regional network that saves countless animals and unites people on a shared mission of compassion. But what do you think of Laura's journey and the impact of Riverbend Rescue? Did Rusty's story inspire you? No. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The small town of Willow Creek lay nestled against the rolling hills of Montana, its quiet streets lined with rustic shops and weathered homes. At the edge of town stood Riverbend Animal Clinic, a modest veterinary practice known for its efficiency and professionalism. But beneath its polished exterior, tensions simmered among its staff. Laura Hayes. Laura was a woman who valued results. With sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, she had built a reputation as a skilled veterinarian who got things done. Yet her approach often clashed with the ideals of compassion and empathy that some of her colleagues held dear. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Nancy Carter, a local animal lover in her 50s, burst through the clinic's doors. In her arms was a golden retriever, matted with dirt and trembling. The dog's ribs were visible beneath her dull coat, and her swollen belly revealed it. "Please, I need help," Nancy cried, her voice breaking. "I found her by the road. She's hurt, and I think she's going to give birth." Laura glanced up from her clipboard, her brow furrowing. "We're already at capacity," she said flatly. "I'm sorry, but we can't take her in right now." Nancy's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't just turn her away. She'll die out there." Laura set her clipboard down, her tone firm. "Ms. Cutter, I understand your concern, but we have limited staff and resources. If we take in every stray, we won't be able to care for the animals already here." The tension in the room was palpable. Nancy clutched the dog tighter, her knuckles white. Before Laura could respond, the clinic's door swung open again and a familiar figure stepped inside. Dr. Michael Everett, the retired founder of Riverbend, exuded an air of quiet authority. Though in his 60s, his presence commanded respect. "What's going on here?" Michael asked, his eyes scanning the scene. Nancy turned to him, her voice pleading. "Dr. Everett, this dog needs help, but she's being turned away." Michael's gaze shifted to Laura, who met his eyes with a mix of defiance and discomfort. "They Laura always do this strong." Laura hesitated, then said, "We're stretched too thin. I made the call to prioritize the animals already in our care." Michael stepped forward, crouching beside the dog. He gently placed a hand on her head, his voice softening. "Her name is Rusty," he said. "She's one of the dogs I've been fostering, and I'd been searching for weeks." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Laura's eyes widened in shock as the weight of Michael's words settled. "Rusty is yours?" she asked, her usually steady voice faltering. Michael nodded, his hand still resting gently on Rusty's head. "She ran off during a storm. I thought I had lost you for good." His gaze shifted below her knife, very piercing yet calm. "We're done." Nancy let out a sigh of relief, her shoulders sagging as she placed Rusty on the examination table. Laura's jaw tightened, but she knew better than to argue. Michael Everett wasn't just a respected figure in Willow Creek. He was a legend in veterinary, known for his pioneering work in animal rescue and welfare. "Fine," Laura said curtly, grabbing a pair of gloves. "Let's get her checked out." She approached the examination table, her movements brisk and efficient. Rusty flinched slightly as Laura examined her leg, which was swollen and oozing blood from a deep gash. "This wound is infected," Laura noted, her tone clinical. "When is she?" Dangerously underweight for a dog this far along. Michael stood beside her, his expression grave. "She needs antibiotics immediately. We'll need to monitor her closely if she's going to have any chance of the birth." Which means more time, more resources, and more strain on an already stretched staff, Laura muttered under her breath. Michael's eyes narrowed. "Laura, every life we save matters. Don't lose sight of that." As the day wore on, Rusty became the center of attention at the clinic. Nancy stayed by her side, stroking her fur and murmuring words of encouragement. Laura worked silently, her focus on stabilizing the dog while suppressing the growing frustration bubbling within her. When Rusty was finally settled into a kennel, Laura stepped into the break room where Michael was waiting with a cup of coffee. "Very well. She's a staple for now," Laura reported, crossing her arms. "But this doesn't change the fact we're stretched thin, Michael. Taking in cases like this jeopardizes the animals we're already caring for." Michael sipped his coffee, his calm demeanor unwavering. "And turning her away would have jeopardized her life." Laura hesitated, a question striking a nerve. "Okay, it's not that simple," she said finally, "and I'm trying to run a clinic, not a charity." Michael leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. This clinic was built on the belief that every life, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant it may seem to others, is worth fighting for. If we lose that, we lose everything. Laura didn't respond, but the weight of his words lingered as she left the room. In the following days, Rusty's presence began to shift the atmosphere at the clinic. Staff members who had been skeptical at first found themselves drawn to the golden retriever's gentle spirit. Even Laura, despite her reservations, couldn't ignore the way Rusty wagged her tail weakly every time. But the challenges were far from over. Rusty's condition remained fragile, and as her due date approached, the team prepared for what would likely be a difficult delivery. Nancy, who visited every day, became a familiar figure at the clinic. One afternoon, as she sat with Rusty, she turned to Laura, her tone tentative. "You know, she's not just a dog, she's a fighter, and she deserves someone fighting for her too." Laura paused, her hands gripping a clipboard. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. As the days turned into a week, Rusty's condition became the focal point of the clinic's daily operations. Her wound had begun to heal under careful treatment. Despite the medical challenges, Rusty displayed a quiet resilience that touched everyone who interacted with her. Even the most skeptical staff members couldn't help but be drawn to her gentle demeanor. One evening, as the clinic began to wind down, Laura found herself lingering by Rusty's kennel. The dog's golden fur had regained some of its sheen, and Rose's eyes, clouded with fear, now held a flicker of throttle. Laura crouched down, resting her arms on her knees. "You're tougher than you look, ain't you?" she murmured. Shortly after, looking ahead, Todd, who was pissed. "She likes you," a voice said behind her. Laura turned to see Michael standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and a small smile on. "She doesn't know me," Laura replied, her tone neutral. "She knows enough," Michael countered. "Animals have a way of sensing what's inside us, sometimes better than we do ourselves." Laura leaned back on her heels, the weight of his words settling over her. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. Regret what? Running this clinic, making these kinds of decisions every day. Sacrificing so much for animals that some people know they don't worth the trouble. Michael considered her question for a moment before answering. "I won't lie. There were times it felt overwhelming, but regret? Never. Every life we save is a reminder of why we do this. And it's not just about the animal, it is about what they teach us too." Laura nodded slightly, though she didn't respond. The conversation lingered in her mind long after Michael left the room. A few days later, the clinic was thrown into chaos when Rusty went into labor earlier than expected. "Dr. Hayes, it's Rusty. She's in labor, but something's wrong." Laura dropped what she was doing and rushed to the kennel area. Michael and Nancy were already there, along with a few other staff members. Rusty was panting heavily, her body trembling as "She's in distress," Michael said, his tone urgent. "We need to get her into the surgery room." Laura snapped into action, directing the team to prepare for an emergency procedure. "Get me oxygen, fluids, and the surgeon code. We don't have much time." Nancy hovered nearby, her hands clasped tightly together. "Please, save her," she whispered. Laura met her gaze, determination shining in her eyes. "We will." As Rusty was carefully moved to the operating table, the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. It was more than just another case. It was a fight for life, and every decision counted. The operating room was a flurry of activity as Laura and her team worked to stabilize Rusty. Her vitals are weak, the technicians. Michael stood nearby, ready to assist, but letting Laura take the lead. "You've got this," he said quietly, his tone calm but reassuring. Laura nodded, her hands steady as she assessed the situation. "She's exhausted, and the puppies are putting too much strain on her. We need to perform a C-section immediately." The room grew tense as the team sprang into action. Laura made precise incision, her movements fluid and practiced. The first puppy was delivered within minutes, a tiny, squirming bundle of goldy fur that let out a "Puppy 1 is out," and the nurse called, carefully wrapping the newborn in a towel. Laura worked quickly, delivering another puppy, then another. Each one brought a mixture of relief and urgency as Rusty's condition remained fragile. "Last one," Laura announced, her voice steady but strained. She carefully lifted the smallest puppy from Rusty's womb, its tiny body motionless. For a moment the room held its breath. "Come on," Laura muttered, gently rubbing the puppy's chest. A soft gasp escaped its tiny mouth, followed by a weak cry. The tension in the room broke as the team let out collective sighs of relief. "She did it," Michael said, a proud smile spreading across his face. But Laura wasn't ready to celebrate yet. "She's not out of the woods," she said, her gaze fixed on Rusty. "We need to close her up and get her stable." Hours later, Rusty was resting in the recovery room, her 6 puppies nestled beside her. Nancy sat by her side, tears streaming down her face as she stroked Rusty. "She's a miracle." Laura, standing nearby, allowed herself a small smile. "She's a fighter, that's for sure." The success of the surgery brought a temporary sense of calm to the clinic, but the challenges were far from over. Caring for Rusty and her puppies required constant attention, and the strain on the staff was becoming more apparent. The next morning, Laura was in her office reviewing patient files when Michael walked in, a cup of coffee in each hand. Andala's stepmother took one glance at Auburn, then placed her hand into. "Thanks," Laura replied, though her tone lacked its usual edge. Michael sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You handled yourself well last night," blurted Laura and shrugged her. "It's more than that," Michael said. "I saw the way you worked. You cared, not just about getting the job done, but about Rusty. That's why you're here, Laura, whether you want to admit it or not." Laura opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, there was a knock at the door. One of the technicians poked their head in. "Dr. Hayes, we've got a situation," they said. "A Labrador was hit by a car and needs immediate attention." Laura stood, already reaching for her coat. "Let's go." As the hours turned into days, the clinic grew busier than ever. Rusty and her puppies continued to recover, but the new influx of emergencies tested the limits of the staff. Tensions began to rise, with some questioning whether taking in Rusty had been the right decision. One afternoon, during a brief lull, Nancy approached Laura in the break room. "I know things have been chaotic," Nancy said, her tone apologetic. "But I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Rusty." Laura took a sip of her coffee, her expression unreadable. She's lucky to have someone like you fighting for her. Nancy smiled. Maybe, but I think she's lucky to have you too. You don't understand. Living with depression as my revilement untakes me. What the hell I would have done while I was hefty. The following days at Riverbend Animal Clinic were a blur of activity. Rusty's recovery progressed steadily, and her 6 puppies thrived under. One afternoon, as Laura finished suturing a minor wound on a rescued stray, she overheard 2 techniques. "Can't believe we're putting so much into that dog and her puppies," one of them said. "What about all the others we've had to turn away?" Laura froze, their words hitting a nerve. "Hey," snapped the other technician, "Rusty deserves a chance just like any of the others, and it's not like we're doing this alone. People are donating supplies because of her story." The argument faded as the 2 walked away, but the seeds of doubt lingered in Laura's mind. Was she making the right choices, or were her priorities skewed? Later that evening, Laura sat in her office staring at a growing stack of bills and patient charts. The financial strain was evident, and the tension among the staff was palpable. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Michael stepped inside, his expression calm but firm. "Got a minute?" he asked. Laura gestured for him to sit, and he dropped into the chair across from her. "I know things have been tough lately," Michael began, folding his hands. "And I know you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. But I'm going to ask you okay?" Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. "Managing? Barely." Michael nodded, his eyes softening. "You've done an incredible job with Rusty and the puppies, but this isn't just about one case. It's about the bigger." "And what's the bigger picture, Michael?" Laura asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "The bigger picture," Michael said evenly, "is the reason this clinic exists in the first place. To give animals like Rusty a fighting chance. To show people that compassion isn't a weakness, it's what makes us strong." Laura leaned back in her chair, his words striking a chord she wasn't ready to acknowledge. The next morning, Nancy arrived at the clinic with a tray of coffee and pastries for the staff. She made her rounds, chatting with everyone and checking on Rusty and her puppy. When she reached Laura, who was reviewing patient notes at the front desk, she hesitated. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Laura looked up, a hint of curiosity in her eye. "Sure." Nancy gestured toward the waiting area, and the 2 sat down. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for Rusty," Nancy began, "and I want to help." "You already are," Laura replied, her tone neutral. Nancy shook her head. "I mean, really help. I've been talking to people in the community, and they're moved by Rusty's story. They want to support the clinic, donations, supplies, volunteer hours, you name it." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" Nancy nodded. "People care, Laura. You just have to let them." For the first time in days, Laura felt a spark of hope. As word spread about Rusty, the community began to rally around Riverbend. Supplies and donations poured in, easing. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. The staff, once weighed down by stress, began to find new energy in a support of receiving news. Even Laura couldn't ignore the difference it made. But as things seemed to stabilize, a new challenge emerged. One evening, Laura received a call from a local journalist who had heard about Rusty's story. "We'd love to feature Riverbend in our paper," the journalist said, "but I have to ask, do you think it's fair to prioritize one dog over so many others?" The question hung in the air long after Laura ended the call. That night, as Laura sat in the recovery room with Rusty and her puppies, she found herself wrestling with the journalist's question, was it fair? Rusty lifted her head and nudged one of her puppies closer, her movements tender and deliberate. "Maybe it's not about the fair," she murmured. "Maybe it's about doing what you can, when you can." Rusty's tail thumped against the blanket as if in agreement. The momentum created by Rusty's story continued to grow, bringing both hope and scrutiny to Riverbend Animal Clinic. While donations and support flooded in, so did questions from outsiders about the clinic's priorities. One afternoon, as Laura was finishing a routine checkup on a senior Labrador, Michael entered the examination room with a solemn expression. "We need to talk," he said. Laura followed him to the office, where Nancy was waiting, her face unusually serious. "What's going on?" Laura asked, taking a seat. Michael handed her a printout from an online article. The headline: "Local clinic chooses stray dog over community needs. Is this the right approach?" Laura's stomach sank as she skimmed the piece. The article questioned whether Riverbend's focus on Rusty had diverted resources from other animals, highlighting cases of pets turned away in recent weeks. Nancy spoke first. "This isn't fair. They don't understand the whole picture." "It doesn't matter if it's fair," Laura said, setting the paper down. "What that is how people perceive us. If they think they can play fresh, it should tell me everything we've worked." Michael leaned forward. "So what do? Do we stop fighting for cases like Rusty's because it's not practical enough? Or do we show them why just work matters?" Laura met his gaze, her jaw tightening. "We prove..." Determined to set the record straight, Laura agreed to an interview with the same journalist who had questioned the clinic's decision. Nancy joined her, eager to support both Rusty's story and the clinic's mission. The interview took place in the clinic's garden, where Rusty lay in the sun with her puppies, now growing stronger by the day. The journalist: "Dr. Hayes, Riverbend has received praise for saving Rusty, but there's also been criticism. How do you respond to claims that prioritizing her has come at the expense of other animals?" Laura took a deep breath, her voice steady. "Every animal we save has a story. Rusty's case may seem like an exception, but it's not. It's a reminder that every life matters, no matter how small or hopeless it seems." And Nancy chimed in. "Rusty inspired this community. People who never cared about animal welfare before are now stepping up to help. That's the ripple effect." What? The journalist nodded, jotting down notes. "And so you believe Rusty's story has made a broader impact?" Laura gestured to the clinic where volunteers were working alongside staff. "Look around. The proof is everywhere." The interview was published days later, accompanied by heartwarming photos of Rusty and her puppy. The article painted a picture of a clinic, not just saving one dog, but inspiring. Yet, not everyone was convinced. One evening, during a community forum held at the local town hall, Laura faced tough questions from concerned residents. "Why should my taxes support a clinic that can't handle its priorities?" one man asked. Before Laura could respond, Nancy stood up. "Because this isn't just about Rusty," she said firmly. "It's about what she represents. She's a symbol of hope for every animal and every person who's ever felt like they didn't matter. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're part of the problem." The room fell silent. Michael stepped forward, adding, "Our clinic isn't perfect, but we're not just saving animals. We're teaching people to care. That's a priority worth fighting for." The forum marked a turning point. While some remained critical, many walked away with a newfound respect for Riverbend's food. As Laura returned to the clinic that night, she paused outside Rusty's kennel. The golden retriever wagged her tail, her puppies snuggled beside her. "You've caused quite a stir," Laura said softly, "but maybe that's exactly what made it." Rusty blinked up at her, her expression as serene. The weeks following the town hall meeting were transformative for Riverbend Animal Clinic. Laura found herself at the center of this unexpected attention. Though she wasn't comfortable with the spotlight, she began to see it as an opportunity, a way to highlight the importance of their work and rally even more so. One Saturday morning, as the clinic opened its doors, a family entered with a young boy clutching a small cardboard box. "Hi there," Borda said gently. "What's in the box?" The boy hesitated, then placed the box on the counter and opened it to reveal a tiny kitten, shivering and weak. Laura examined the kitten, noting its fragile state. "She's in rough shape, but we'll do everything we can," she assured him. The boy's mother spoke up. "We read about Rusty. That's why we came here. We know you'll take good care of her." Laura felt a pang of emotion as she carried the kitten to the exam room. Rusty's story had indeed changed how people saw the clinic, and perhaps how she saw it herself. As the clinic worked to save the kitten, Rusty and her puppies continued to thrive. The puppies were playful and curious, often tumbling over each other as they explored their enclosure. Rusty, ever patient, kept a watchful eye on it. One afternoon, Nancy arrived with a stack of adoption applications for the puppies. "It's amazing," she said, handing the forms to Laura. "People are lining up to give these little ones a home." Laura flipped through the applications, her heart warming at the thought of Rusty's puppies finding loving families. But as she reached the last form, she paused. It was from a young woman who had recently lost her dog and was looking for a new companion to heal her. "This one," Laura said, holding up the application. "Let's start with her." Nancy beamed. "I knew you'd pick that one." Meanwhile, the clinic's workload continued to grow, and the team faced mounting challenges. But one evening, as Laura worked late in her office, Michael knocked on the door and stepped in. "You're still here?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Laura gestured to the stack of charts on her desk. "There's always more to do." Michael pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "You've done an incredible job, Laura, but you can't do it all on your own." "I'm trying," Laura said, her voice tinged with frustration. "It feels like no matter how much we do, it's never enough." Michael nodded. "That's the nature of this work. But you've built something special here. A team, a community. Let them help." Laura leaned back in her chair, Michael's words sinking in. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. The following day, Laura called a staff meeting. She outlined a plan to better distribute responsibilities and involve the growing network of volunteers. The team embraced the changes, relieved to see Laura trusting them. As the weeks went on, the clinic found its rhythm again. Rusty's puppies began going to their new homes, each adoption marked with a mix of joy and bittersweet goodbyes. Nancy accompanied every handoff, ensuring each family was Rusty, now healthier and stronger, became a beloved figure at the clinic. Families who had adopted her puppies often returned to visit, bringing updates and photos. One evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek, Laura stood outside the clinic, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Michael joined her, a cup of coffee in hand. "You've built something amazing here," he said, his voice filled with pride. Laura smiled faintly. "We've built it, all of us, and I think we're just getting started." Michael raised his cup in a silent toast, and Laura felt a rare sense of peace. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that they were making a difference, not just for the animals, but for the people who cared for them. The clinic settled into a steady rhythm, bolstered by the newfound support from the community. Rusty and her puppies had not only captured hearts, but had become symbols of resilience and compassion. Families continued to visit the clinic, some bringing donations, others offering their time as volunteers. But as Laura looked around one bustling afternoon, she noticed that the clinic was... That evening, Laura gathered the staff for a meeting. They sat in the break room, their faces a mix of weariness and determination. "I know things have been intense," Laura began, her voice steady. "And I know we've been pushed to our limits, but I want you all to know how proud I am of what we've accomplished." The room was quiet as her words sank in. "We're not just running a clinic anymore," Lara continued. "We're building something bigger, a place where people know their animals will be cared for, no matter the circumstances. And that's because of all of..." Michael chimed in, a rare smile on his face. "What we're doing here matters, and the work you're putting in, it's changing lives, human and animal alike." The staff nodded, a renewed sense of purpose washing over them. Momentum led to a pivotal moment when the clinic received a grant from a national animal welfare organization. The grant, awarded for the clinic's outstanding community impact, came with funds to expand their facilities and hire additional staff. Laura was stunned when she received the news. She gathered Michael and Nancy in her office, unable to hide her excitement. "This is it," she said, holding the grant letter. "This is how we—" Nancy clapped her hands together. "Rusty did this," she said, grinning. Michael chuckled. "Rusty and a whole lot of hard work." The expansion plans moved quickly. The clinic added a new wing, complete with an expanded recovery area and a dedicated space for emergency cases. They also hired 2 additional veterinarians, easing the workload on Laura. Meanwhile, Rusty's journey took another poignant turn. A local family who had recently adopted one of her puppies expressed interest in giving Rusty a permanent home. They had a spacious farm on the outskirts of town and a history of rescuing animals. He bounded toward the household, mindful of being careful. Laura and Nancy visited the farm to meet the family and look around for a minute. "This is it," Nancy said, watching Rusty explore. Laura nodded, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, she deserves this." The day Rusty left the clinic was both joyful and emotional. Staff members gathered to say goodbye, many holding back tears. Laura knelt beside Rusty, scratching behind her ears one last time. "You've done more than you'll ever know," Laura whispered. "Now go and live your best life." Rusty wagged her tail, licking Laura's hand as if to say thank you. In the weeks that followed, the clinic thrived. Rusty's legacy lived on, not just in her puppies, but in the sense of purpose she had brought to everyone at Riverbend. Laura, once reluctant to embrace the emotional side of her work, now led with both heart and skill. One evening, as Laura walked through the quiet clinic, she paused by a bulletin board filled with photos of adopted animals. At the center was a picture of Rusty with her new family surrounding. Michael approached, standing beside her. Laura smiled. "And it's just the beginning." Michael nodded. You've come a long way, Laura. We all have." Laura glanced at the photo one last time, a sense of peace washing over her. For the first time, she felt not just the weight of her responsibilities, but the joy of knowing she was making a difference. Months after Rusty's adoption, Riverbend Animal Clinic had become a hub of hope and compassion for the community. The new wing was bustling with activity, and the clinic was now able to handle emergencies. One crisp autumn morning, as Laura was finishing a checkup on a German Shepherd, Michael walked into the exam room, his face unusually serious. "Facebooking at our website." Laura looked up, her brow furrowing. "What kind of problem?" Michael handed her a folder filled with reports. Over the past month, several dogs have gone missing from nearby neighborhoods, and families are desperate and the police don't have many leads. They think it might be organized theft, potentially. Laura flipped through the reports, her stomach tightening. "This is horrible. How can we help?" Michael nodded toward the hallway. "Nancy's in the lobby with a couple who just lost their dog. I thought you'd want to talk." In the lobby, Laura met the distraught couple. The wife clutched a photo of their golden retriever, Bailey, her eyes red from crying. "He's never run away before," the husband said, his voice heavy with worry. "We think someone took him." Lauda listened intently, her heart aching for them. "We'll do everything we can to help," she assured them. "Have you filed a report with the police?" The wife nodded. "Yes, but they said without solid evidence, there's not much they can do." Nancy stepped forward, her expression resolute. "We can start by spreading the word, flyers, social media posts, anything to get people looking for Bailey and the other." Laura agreed, "And we'll keep an eye out here at the clinic. If any of the missing dogs show up, we'll let you know immediately." As the days passed, more reports of missing dogs surfaced. The clinic became a central hub for information, with a bulletin board dedicated to photos and descriptions of the missing pets. Volunteers joined the effort, distributing. Despite their efforts, the situation only grew more dire. One evening, as Laura sat in her office reviewing patient files, Michael burst in holding his phone. "You need to see this," he said, handing it to her. On the screen was a video taken by a local resident. It showed a van idling suspiciously near a park. Moments later, two men emerged and began coaxing a dog into. Laura's blood boiled. "This is proof. Have the police seen this?" Michael nodded, and they're on it, but it might take time to track these guys down. Laura clenched her fists. Time is the one thing these dogs don't. Determined to act, Laura rallied her team. They decided to organize a public meeting to raise awareness about the disappearances and discuss ways the community could protect their pets. The meeting, held in the town hall, was packed with concerned residents. Laura stood at the front of the room, her nerves tingling as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about the dogs that have already gone missing," she said, her voice steady. "It's about making sure no more families have to go through this. We need to work together to stop this from happening." Michael presented the video evidence, and Nancy shared tips on safeguarding pets. The community responded with a mix of outrage and determination, vowing to stay vigilant and report any suspicious activity. Despite their best efforts, the thefts continued. Late one night, Laura received a call from a woman sobbing uncontrollably. Her voice was barely audible as she explained that her Labrador had been taken from her backyard. "We'll find him," Mara promised, her voice fixed. Hanging up, she leaned back in her chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just a crisis. It was a fight for justice, and Laura was determined not to lose. The following morning, Laura arrived at the clinic to find Nancy waiting for her, holding a stack of printed flyers. "I've updated the missing dogs list," Nancy said, handing her a flyer. "It's great every day." Laura scanned the list, her heart sinking. The number of dogs reported missing had doubled in just a week. "This has to stop," she said, her voice tight with determination. Michael joined them, a determined look on his face. "I've been in touch with some local rescue groups. They've seen this kind of thing before, organized theft for illegal breeding, or even dog fighting." Nancy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's monstrous." Laura's jaw tightened. "If that's what we're dealing with, we need to act fast. Do we have any leads?" Michael nodded. "The police are watching the park where the van was spotted, but it's a big area and these guys can't." That evening, as Laura locked up the clinic, she noticed a shadowy figure lingering near the dumpster in the back lot. "Hello, can I help you?" she called, her voice firm. The figure stepped into the light, a wiry teenage boy. I didn't know where I was to go," the boy stammered. "They were going to hurt him." Laura lowered her flashlight, her concerns shifting to the dog. "What do you mean? Who's they?" The boy hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might be watching. The eyes at the van. They have a place just outside town. They got a place just outside town. Laura's heart pounded. "Where does you know where this is?" He nodded. "It's an old warehouse near the highway." Inside the clinic, Laura and Michael questioned the boy further. He described the warehouse in detail, mentioning whipping cages and the sound of barking coming from inside. "It's bad," he said quietly. "Real bad." Michael turned to Laura. "This could be the break we've been waiting for." Laura nodded, her mind racing. "We need to act, but we can't do it alone. I'll call a police." The next morning, Detective Martinez, the officer leading the investigation, arrived at the clinic. She reviewed the boy's testimony and agreed to organize a raid on the warehouse. "This is solid intel," Martinez said, "but it's dangerous. These people won't go down without a fight." "I'll go with you," Laura said without hesitation. The original idea was to evacuate Drew Nicolette. I need eyes. "These are my patients," Laura replied, her voice unwavering. "I need to be." After a tense pause, Martinez relented. "Stay behind the team." That night, Laura, Michael, and Nancy joined the police at the staging area near the warehouse. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Martinez briefed the group. "We'll go in teams. Remember, these people may be armed. Stay alert and follow orders." Laura's stomach churned as she donned a reflective vest and checked the supplies she had brought: first aid kits, blankets, and water bowl. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're doing the right thing." Laura nodded, though her nerves were on edge. The raid began just after midnight. The police moved swiftly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they breached the warehouse doors. Inside, the scene was worse than Laura had imagined. Rows of cages lined the walls, filled with dogs of all breeds and sizes. Many were injured, their eyes wide with fear. Laura's heart broke as she followed the officers inside. She and Nancy immediately began tending to the animals, unlocking cages and assessing their conditions. As the raid continued, shouts echoed through the warehouse. Laura looked up to see a group of men being escorted out in handcuffs. Among them was a burly man with a sneer etched across his face. "The leader of the operation is Martinez." Despite the success of the raid, the aftermath was overwhelming. Dozens of dogs needed urgent medical attention, and the clinic's resources were already stretched thin. "Figure it out," Laura said firmly as she worked through the night, treating injuries and soothing frightened animals. "We all." Nancy nodded, tears streaming down her face as she cradled a small terrier. "They're safe now. That's all that matters." The scene at Riverbend Animal Clinic the next morning was both chaotic and heartwarming. Volunteers from all over Willow Creek had come out, responding to social media posts about the raid. Laura stood in the center of the chaos, directing staff and volunteers. "We need to prioritize the most critical cases," she called out. "If the dogs are stable, move them to the recovery area. Make sure they have food and water." Nancy moved through the crowd, organizing supplies. "We've got donations pouring in," she said, handing Laura a clipboard. "Food, blankets, even offers to foster some of the dogs." Michael approached with a clipboard of his own. "We've got a problem," he said. "Several of the dogs are microchipped. We need to start contacting their owners." Laura nodded. "Let's focus on reuniting them first. The others, we'll figure it out." As the day wore on, the clinic became a beacon of hope. Families who had reported their dogs missing began to arrive, their faces lighting up when they spotted their beloved pets. One such moment occurred when a young girl named Emily rushed into the clinic with her parents. "Bailey!" Emily cried, running to the dog. The Labrador barked excitedly, his tail wagging furiously as Emily wrapped her arms around him. Her parents watched with tears in their eyes, thanking Lauren and I. Moments like these fueled the clinic's efforts, reminding everyone why they had fought so hard. However, not all stories had happy endings. Many of the dogs had no identifying information, and some were in such poor health that their futures were uncertain. Laura spent every spare moment caring for the most critical cases, her exhaustion pushed aside by sheer determination. Late one night, as she was cleaning a wound on a small terrier, Michael entered the room carrying a tray of coffee. "You need to take a break," he said, setting the tray down. Laura shook her head. "Not yet. There's too much to do." Michael sighed, pulling up a chair beside her. "You can't save them all, Laura." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "I know," she said quietly. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you're doing more than anyone could ask. But," Laura looked at him, the weight of the past few days evident in her eyes. "Sometimes it feels like all." "You're not," Michael said firmly. "Look outside. Look at the people who've come together because of this. That's your doing." The next morning, Detective Martinez stopped by the clinic to provide an update. "The men we arrested are facing multiple charges," she said. "But we've also uncovered links to a larger network. This raid was just the beginning." Laura's heart sank. You mean there are more dogs out there? Martinez nodded grimly. We're working on it, but it's going to take time. Laura clenched her fists. Let us know how we can help. Martinez smiled faintly. You've already done more than enough, but I'll keep you updated. As the weeks went by, the clinic continued to handle the aftermath of the raid. Rusty's name came up often in conversations, her story serving as a reminder of how far the clinic had come. One afternoon, Nancy brought in a photo album filled with pictures of Rusty and her puppies in their new home. I thought we could use a little inspiration, Nancy said, placing the album on the counter. Laura flipped through the pages, a rare smile spreading across her face. Should be proud, she said softly. Nancy nodded, and so despite the progress, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that their work was far from over. Michael joined her, his expression thoughtful. You've done something incredible here, you said. Laura crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the board. We all have, but there's still so much to do. Michael nodded. And we'll do it. Together. Laura smiled faintly, a flicker of hope lighting up her tired eyes. Together, she agreed. As the dust settled from the raid, Riverbend Animal Clinic began to shift its focus. While the immediate needs of the rescued dogs were being met, Laura and her team knew they couldn't stop there. The recent events had revealed a larger systemic issue. One morning, Laura convened her team in the break room for a meeting. The staff and volunteers gathered around, their faces reflecting a mix of exhaustion and dedication. We've done incredible work these past few weeks, Laura began, her voice steady. But the raid was just the tip of the iceberg. Detective Martinez has confirmed that this network is larger than we thought. While the police worked to do, Nancy raised her hand. Do you mean more raids? More orderment? Laura shook her head. Not exactly. Our job is to heal and protect, but we can also educate. If people know how to protect their pets and recognize signs of trafficking, we can make it harder for these criminals. Michael chimed in. An awareness campaign could be a good start. Flyers, social media, even partnerships with local schools and community centers. The team nodded in agreement, their energy renewed by the prospect of taking proactive steps. The campaign, dubbed Pause for Protection, launched the following week. Volunteers distributed flyers throughout Willow Creek while the clinic's social media platforms shared tips on keeping pets safe. The community responded enthusiastically. Families attended workshops hosted by Riverbend, learning everything from microchipping their pets to identifying suspicious behavior in their neighborhoods. Local businesses joined the effort, donating supplies and funds to support the clinic's expanded mission. Nancy, who spearheaded the social media efforts, couldn't hide her excitement. We're reaching people, Laura, she said, showing her a post that had been shared hundreds of times. Laura nodded, a sense of pride warming her chest. It's a start. Despite the positive momentum, challenges remained. Some of the rescued dogs, traumatized by their experiences, struggled to adapt. One such case was a large mastiff named Tank, whose aggressive behavior made him difficult to handle. Laura spent hours working with Tank, using gentle techniques to rebuild his trust. One evening, as she sat outside his kennel, Tank finally approached her, his massive head resting tentatively on her lap. Here you go, big guy, Laura murmured, scratching behind his ears. It's okay. You're safe. Moments like these reminded Laura why she had chosen this path, even when the work felt overwhelming. As the weeks turned into months, one day Detective Martinez stopped by with an update. We've made significant progress, she said, handing Laura a folder. The information from the raid led us to several more locations. Laura flipped through the photos in the folder, images of dogs being freed from cages and reunited with their families. Her eyes misted as she looked up at Martinez. Thank you, she said. Martinez smiled. Thank you, Laura. Without your team's help, this wouldn't have been possible. One evening, as Laura walked through the clinic, she noticed a small group of volunteers gathered round the recovery. It's a gift from the community, Nancy explained, handing it to Laura. Laura opened the album, her breath catching as she flipped through the pages. Each photo showed a family with one of the rescued dogs. Their smiles. This, Laura began, her voice catching. This is incredible. Michael appeared beside her, a proud smile on his face. It's a reminder, he said, of what we're fighting for. Laura nodded, her heart swelled. But as she closed the album, a thought lingered in her mind. The fight wasn't over. There were still animals out there, trapped in situations like Rusty's or worse. The next morning, Laura met with her team and proposed a bold idea, expanding Riverbend's mission to include a dedicated rescue division. It won't be easy, she admitted, but I believe we can do it. We've already proven what we're capable of. The room erupted in applause, the team's enthusiasm igniting like wildfire. Michael approached Laura afterward, his eyes twinkling. You've come a long way. Laura smiled. We all have. The decision to establish a rescue division at Riverbend Animal Clinic set a new course for Laura and her team. The initiative, called Riverbend Rescue, aimed to partner with local law enforcement and animal welfare organizations to save animals. The announcement drew widespread attention, both from supporters and skeptics. While many praised the clinic's efforts, others questioned whether they were overextending themselves. Laura took the criticism in stride, determined to prove that the first mission for Riverbend Rescue came sooner than expected. Detective Martinez contacted Laura with intel about a rural property suspected of housing a large group of neglected animals. This isn't just a rescue, Martinez warned. It's a potential crime scene. Are you sure your team is ready for this? Laura didn't hesitate. We're ready. The team prepared meticulously for the operation. Michael coordinated logistics, ensuring they had medical supplies, transport vehicles, and enough staff to handle the influx of animals. On the morning of the rescue, the atmosphere was electric. We've trained for this, she said. Today, we're not just saving animals. We're giving them a chance at a life they never thought possible. Let's make it count. The property was worse than anyone had imagined. Dozens of dogs were confined to makeshift pens, their fur matted and their eyes filled with fear. The stench of neglect hung heavy in the air. Laura's heart ached as she moved through the site, assessing the animals and directing her team. We'll start with the critical cases, she instructed, pointing to a group of dogs showing signs of malnutrition. As the rescue progressed, the team encountered resistance from the property owner, who yelled at the police and tried to block access to certain areas. Martina stood firm, her presence ensuring the operation continued without interference. In one corner of the property, Laura discovered a small, emaciated beagle huddled in the shadows of a broken crate. The dog's ribs were visible, and she flinched at Laura's approach. It's okay, Laura whispered, crouching down. She extended her hand slowly, letting the beagle sniff her fingers. The beagle hesitated, then took a shaky step toward Laura, collapsing into her arm. By the end of the day, over 50 animals had been rescued. The team returned to the clinic exhausted but triumphant. The recovery area was filled with wagging tails and grateful eyes as the animals received their first taste of kindness in what must have been years. Nancy moved through the room, distributing blankets and bowls of water. It's overwhelming, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But it's worth it. Michael nodded. Every single one of them is worth it. The success of the rescue solidified Riverbend Rescue's reputation. Donations poured in, and the community rallied behind the clinic's expanded mission. Families came forward to foster or adopt the rescued animals, giving them the homes they had always deserved. One evening, as Laura stood in the recovery area, she noticed the beagle she had saved from the crate. The dog, now named Hope by one of the volunteers, was wagging her tail tentatively, her eyes brighter than before. "You're a survivor," Laura said softly, kneeling beside her. "And because of you, so many others will have a chance too." In the weeks that followed, Riverbend Rescue grew into a regional force for good. The clinic hosted adoption events, educational workshops, and fundraising galas, ensuring they could sustain their mission. Lara, once focused solely on efficiency, had become a leader driven by compassion. Her journey from skepticism to wholehearted commitment inspired everyone around her. One afternoon, Michael approached her in the outdoor play area where several of the rescued dogs were frolicking. "You've built something extraordinary," he said, his tone filled with pride. Laura smiled, watching the dogs chase each other across the grass. "We've built it," she corrected. "This was never just me." Michael chuckled. "Still, it wouldn't have happened without your vision." Laura turned to him, her gaze steady. "And it wouldn't have lasted without everyone's belief in it. That's what makes this place special." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the sanctuary, Laura felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For every life they saved, for every heart they touched, Riverbend was no longer just a clinic. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of Months after the rescue operation, Riverbend Animal Clinic was thriving. The new Riverbend Rescue Division had become a cornerstone of the clinic's mission, solidifying its role as a beacon of hope in Willow Creek. The stories of the animals. One crisp winter morning, Laura stood outside the clinic, watching as a line of jars pulled in. Nancy approached with a clipboard, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "We've got 30 families scheduled for today," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "If all goes well, every single one of the rescued dogs will have a home by the end of the day." Laura smiled, her breath visible in the frosty air. "Let's make it happen." The event was a resounding success. Families strolled through the adoption area, meeting the animals and learning about their stories. Children laughed as they played with puppies, and older couples shared quiet moments with senior dogs. One family caught Laura's attention. A young woman named Sarah and a get-together shy we've worked out for millions since. Laura crouched beside them, a warm smile on her face. "Hope's been waiting for the right family. I think she just found it." By the end of the day, every dog had been adopted or placed with foster families. The clinic was buzzing with energy as the staff and volunteers celebrated the milestone. "To the animals who found their forever homes," he said, "and to the people who made it possible." The room erupted in cheers, and Laura felt a rare moment of contentment wash over her. That evening, as the clinic quieted down, Laura wandered through the empty halls. She stopped by the recovery area, now filled with soft blankets and empty cages, a stark contrast to the chaos of just a few months ago. Michael found her there, leaning against the doorframe. "You did it," he said simply. Laura turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "We did it, but it's not over, is it?" Michael shook his head. "Not by a long shot, but you've built something that can last." Laura nodded, her gaze shifting to the bulletin board filled with photos of adopted animals and thank you letters from families. "This is what it's all about," she murmured, "giving them a chance." "And giving people hope," Michael added. The next morning, Laura received an unexpected call from Detective Martinez. "We've tracked down another location," Martinez said. Laura's chest tightened, a mix of anxiety and determination taking hold. "When do we start?" The new rescue operation was far more ambitious than the first. The property Detective Martinez had identified was a sprawling compound deep in the countryside, rumored to house not just dogs. In preparation for the raid, Laura and her team coordinated closely with law enforcement and other rescue organizations. The stakes were higher and the logistics more complex. Michael, ever the strategist, led the effort to secure medical supplies and transport vehicles, while Nancy organized volunteer support for the influx of animals they expected to bring back. The night before the operation, the lawyer gathered her team in the clinic's break room. The atmosphere was tense but resolute. "This is bigger than anything we've done before," Laura began, her voice steady. "It's going to be tough and it's going to be emotional, but we're ready for this. We've proven what we can do." Michael nodded, adding, "Every one of those animals is counting on us, but let's make sure we don't." Nancy stepped forward, a determined look in her eyes. "We'll bring them home, all of them." The room erupted in a chorus of agreements, the team united by a shared purpose. The operation began at dawn. The convoy of police cars and rescue vehicles wound through the foggy countryside, their headlights piercing the early morning mist. Laura sat in the passenger seat of Tile's vehicle, her heart pounding as they approached the come. When they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The property was surrounded by a chain-link fence, and the sound of barking echoed faintly from within. Detective Martinez gave the signal, and the police moved swiftly to. Laura and her team waited anxiously as the officers breached the gate. Moments later, Martinez waved them in. Inside, the conditions were worse than anyone had anticipated. Rows of makeshift hens housed dozens of dogs, many emaciated and trembling. In a nearby barn, horses with matted coats and sunken eyes stood in stalls filled with filth. Laura's chest tightened as she took in the scene. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice firm. The rescue unfolded like a well-rehearsed dance, each team member moving with precision and purpose. Laura focused on triaging the dogs, directing her team to prioritize those in critical condition. In one pen, she found a small dachshund curled up in the corner, barely responsive. She scooped the dog into her arms, her voice soft and reassuring. Nancy, working nearby, spotted a young border collie with a limp and quickly retrieved a leash to guide him out. "We've got you," she said, gently coaxing him forward. Michael supervised the transport of the animals, ensuring they were loaded safely into the waiting vehicles. By the time the operation concluded, over 100 animals had been rescued. The team was exhausted but triumphant as they returned to the clinic where volunteers awaited to help with the influx. As Laura stepped out of her vehicle, she was greeted by cheers from the crowd. She managed a tired smile, her heart swelling with gratitude. "They're safe," she said simply. Nancy approached, tears glistening in her eyes. "You did it again, Laura. We all did." That night, as the clinic buzzed with activity, Laura stood in the recovery area, watching as the rescued animals began to settle in. "We're just getting started," she whispered to herself, a renewed determination taking root in her heart. The days following the rescue were some of the busiest River Bend had ever seen. Every room in the clinic was filled with animals in need of care, and the staff worked around the clock to provide food, medical attention, and comfort to the traumatized. Laura was in the recovery wing, carefully administering fluids to the dachshund she had saved from the compound. The little dog, now named Lucky, was beginning to show signs of improvement. Lucky's eyes fluttered open, and he gave a faint wag of his tail. "There you go, buddy," Laura murmured, a soft smile spreading across her face. "You're going to be a shot." Airing out and wearing rarely saw TL in the Medicom's thorough sleep. Nancy entered the room carrying a trail with liquor. Laura nodded. "He's a fighter just like the rest of them." Nancy hesitated for a moment, then added, "By the way, there's someone here to see you. They're from the State Animal Welfare Board." Laura's brow furrowed. "The Welfare Board, what do they want?" "They didn't say, but they seem impressed with what we're doing," Nancy replied with a grin. "Oh, I think it's good news." In the front office, Laura met Linda Parker, a representative from the State Animal Welfare Board. Linda was a composed woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Dr. Hayes," Linda began, extending a hand. I've been following Riverbend's efforts closely. What you and your team have accomplished is nothing short of extraordinary." "Thank you," Laura replied, shaking Linda's hand. "But it's a team effort. None of this would be possible without everyone here." Linda nodded. "That's clear, which is why I'm here. The state is launching a new program to support your operations like yours. We'd like Riverbend to serve as a model for other clinics and shelters across the region." Laura blinked, momentarily speechless. "A model? You mean expanding our work beyond Willow Creek?" "Exactly," Linda said. "We want to fund your efforts to create training programs, share best practices, and even establish partnerships with clinics in other towns." That evening, Laura shared the news with her team. The room buzzed with excitement as Linda outlined the program and the opportunities it presented. "This is huge," Michael said, his eyes gleaming. "We've always talked about making a bigger impact. Now we can." Nancy nodded enthusiastically. "Think of all the animals we can help, not just here, but everywhere." Laura, though thrilled by the opportunity, remained grounded. "This is incredible, but it's also a big responsibility." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "If anyone can handle it, it's you." Over the next few weeks, Riverbend began laying the groundwork for its new role. Laura worked closely with Linda and her team, developing training materials and outreach programs. One afternoon, as Laura walked through the clinic, she paused in front of the bulletin board filled with photos of adopted animals. A new section had been added. Pictures of animals rescued from the recent operation, now thriving in their new home. Nancy joined her, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Looks like we're making a difference," she said, her tone light but sincere. Laura smiled, her gaze lingering on a photo of Lucky, now in the arms of a little boy with a wide grin. "We are," she said softly, "and it's just the beginning." Months passed, and Riverbend Animal Clinic continued to grow into a regional hub for animal rescue and advocacy. The new programs, launched under the state's support, brought clinics and shelters together, fostering a network of collaboration. One sunny spring afternoon, the clinic hosted its first regional animal welfare summit, bringing together veterinarians, shelter workers, and rescue volunteers from across the state. The event was a celebration of progress and a platform for sharing ideas and strategies. Laura stood at the podium looking out over the crowded conference room. Her journey had brought her here, a once pragmatic veterinarian who had learned to lead with compassion and vision. Taking a deep breath, she began her speech. "When we started this journey, it wasn't about being the best clinic or the biggest rescue. It was about saving one life at a time. And along the way, we realized that every life we save creates a ripple that touches families, communities, and even the people who do the saving." The audience was silent, captivated by it. Today, we're not just celebrating what we've achieved at Riverbend, we're celebrating the power of unity. Because when we come together, we can overcome anything, and every animal we save is a testament to that. The room erupted into applause, and Laura stepped back, her chest swelling with pride. Later that evening, as the summit wrapped up, Laura found herself on the clinic's front porch, gazing at the setting sun. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, and the gentle breeze carried the sounds of laughter and conversation from the event. Michael joined her, a glass of iced tea in his hand. "Quite the day," he said, leaning against the railing. The woman smiled, faintly. "It's hard to believe how far we've come." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And it all started with one dog. Rusty," Laura said softly, the name bringing a wave of fond memories. "She changed everything." Michael raised his glass. To Rusty and to what she inspired. Laura clinked her glass against his, a sense of peace settling over her. As the event wound down, families who had adopted animals from Riverbend began arriving to join the celebration. They brought their dogs and cats, now thriving in loving homes. The sight of so many happy animals brought tears to Laura's eyes. One little boy approached her with a small terrier in his arms. "This is Lucky," I said shyly. "Thanked him for saving him." Laura knelt down, smiling as she scratched Lucky's ears. "You're the one who saved him by giving him a home," she said. The boy beamed and Lucky wagged his tail enthusiastically. That night, as Laura locked up the clinic, she took one last look at the bulletin board. It had grown to include not just photos, but letters, drawings, and mementos from families whose lives. Turning off the lights, Laura walked out into the cool night air. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter than usual, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Riverbend wasn't just a clinic or a rescue, it was a movement, a testament to what was possible when people came together to fight for what was right. And for Laura, it was more than enough.